The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Alexander Sterling III was the epitome of a dream. Young, fabulously wealthy, intelligent, with an impeccable reputation in business circles. He owned corporations, yachts, almost literally, coastal estates, private jets. His name flickered on lists of the world's most influential and eligible bachelors. He lived in a penthouse from whose windows New York City looked like a toy model. He was surrounded by crowds of people, partners, employees, consultants, security, attentive staff. At dinner parties, he was greeted by the most influential guests. At charity auctions, his name was always among the largest donors. It seemed he had everything one could possibly desire. But behind the gleaming facade of the successful man lay a gaping void. Alex was lonely. Terribly, piercingly lonely. His enormous penthouse, furnished with impeccable taste and astronomical cost, often felt like a gilded cage where he was the sole inhabitant. Behind the luxurious interiors, panoramic views, and smart home systems, there was no warmth, no kindred spirit. He lost his parents early, inheriting not only a fortune from his father, but also a harsh lesson. Trust no one. He was raised by nannies and private tutors who came and went, leaving only fleeting traces. Growing up, he watched how people around his father, and later around himself, changed their expressions depending on the size of his bank account. Smiles widened when money was discussed, eyes lit up at the sight of expensive gifts, and flattery flowed like a river. He tried to build relationships. How many times had he met beautiful, intelligent, interesting women? At first, everything went well, but sooner or later, the moment came when his true status became obvious. And then something changed. The ease vanished, replaced by calculation. A gleam appeared in their eyes that had nothing to do with love. Questions about his assets, his future plans, about gifts became increasingly insistent. They stopped seeing him as Alex, a person with his own thoughts, feelings, weaknesses. He became a walking wallet. Prey. The bitterest realization was that he never knew who was truly beside him. Were his friends genuine, or were they only attracted by proximity to his resources? Did his girlfriends love him, or his fortune? This constant suspicion gnawed at his soul, making him cynical and withdrawn. He learned to recognize insincerity from miles away, to see falsehood behind the most beautiful words. And this knowledge was his curse. Gradually, he stopped searching. He grew tired of the endless casting call for the role of millionaire's beloved wife, where he evaluated candidates not by beauty or intelligence, but by how well they concealed their greed. Relationships became rare, short, empty. He spent evenings alone, flipping through art catalogs or staring out the window at the city lights, a city where he seemingly had everything except a place where someone waited for him simply because he was him. One day, after another such draining evening, when he felt on the verge, a thought occurred to him. Crazy, desperate. What if he removed the money factor entirely? What if he became nobody? Not Alexander Sterling III, owner of corporations, but just Alex, a man with no connections, no bank accounts, no elite real estate. In such a guise, could he find someone who would see him, not the shadow cast by his wealth? The idea took root. It wasn't just an experiment. It was a last hope, a chance to find something real in a world that seemed like one giant stage set. He understood the absurdity and risk of the venture. He had never lived any other way. He didn't know hardship, hard work, or rejection. His world was a world of yes, but it was no he needed to hear. No to his money, to hear yes to himself. He began preparations in secret. He transferred business management to trusted associates, thought out a cover story. He rented a small, modest apartment in a neighborhood he'd never even seen from a car window. He packed minimal belongings, the simplest clothes, a little cash. He disconnected all his phones, keeping only one, the most basic, with an unknown number. He changed his appearance, grew light stubble, put on simple framed glasses he previously only wore at home. Standing before the mirror was a man he barely recognized, not the polished, confident style icon, but an ordinary guy, a bit lost, a bit scared, but with a spark of determination in his eyes. Observing his reflection, he felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. He was descending from the pinnacle of the world into its grimmest depths, shedding his golden robes to see if anything valuable remained underneath. This was the grandest and riskiest venture of his life, compared to which any business deal seemed like child's play. He was heading into a world that existed parallel to his own, a world where people didn't have millions, but perhaps possessed that priceless thing money couldn't buy: sincerity, warmth, the ability to love someone not for something, but just because. He was ready to lose all his wealth if only it would help him find his true, hidden heart and someone who could see it. He didn't know that this step would lead him to an encounter that would force him to rethink not only love, but the very essence of life. Alex's world shrank dramatically. From the endless horizons of his former life, he found himself confined to the narrow limits of a single block, a single street, a single modest apartment. The first few days were a shock. The lack of familiar comfort felt almost like physical pain. A hard bed instead of a latex and cashmere mattress, instant coffee instead of fragrant espresso from a personal barista, noise outside the window instead of soundproof panes. But the most terrifying thing was the absence of easy solutions. Previously, any problem could be solved with a single phone call or the swipe of a credit card. Now he had to solve them himself. And often, there were no obvious solutions. He tried to find work. It proved humiliating. His resume, stripped down to the bare minimum to avoid revealing himself, looked ridiculous. His appearance, though carefully disguised as simple, still betrayed someone who had never known manual labor or hardship. His bearing, remnants of his former confidence and authority, was perceived either as arrogance or oddness. He was rejected, politely or rudely, but rejected everywhere, in small shops, auto repair places, construction sites. He felt helpless and useless. This was the first real humiliation, not feigned, but one he had brought upon himself. The days dragged on slowly, monotonously. He wandered the streets, observing people he would never have noticed before. Street vendors, seniors on benches, mothers with strollers, workers in overalls. They lived their own, entirely different lives, where every dollar counts, and the future isn't guaranteed. He felt like an outsider, an alien stranded on an unfamiliar planet. He settled near a small park, behind which hid a narrow street with small shops and cafes. One of them, under a sign reading "The Cozy Corner," was tiny, with lopsided tables on the sidewalk and the smell of cheap pastries. Alex often passed by, hesitant to go in. Even the modest prices now seemed significant to him. One day, sitting on a bench in the park, he saw her. She worked at that very cozy corner, a girl in her early 20s, not a cover model, not a socialite, very simple, even modest. But there was something captivating about her, a subtle beauty, tired but remarkably bright eyes, and a certain inner dignity evident in every movement. She wore a simple uniform, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, but even so she stood out from the crowd. Not because of her clothes or makeup, something else. Purity, sincerity. Alex couldn't quite grasp what it was. He started coming to the park every day around the same time, just sitting on the bench, pretending to read an old newspaper and watching her, how she served customers, always politely, though a bit detached, how she cleared tables, how she smiled at customers, and how that smile changed, became genuine, when she spoke to someone truly, without formalities. His first real test came a few days later. He decided to go into the cafe. He ordered the cheapest tea and a stale bun. He sat at a table by the window, watching her. Suddenly, a tall, loud man, clearly drunk, entered the cafe. He began to rudely harass the girl, making crude jokes and demanding something beyond audacious. The girl tried to remain calm, but it was clear how uncomfortable and scared she was. Fear flickered in her eyes. In that moment, something ancient, masculine stirred within Alex. The protector's instinct. In his past life, such a situation would have been resolved instantly. One call, and security would throw the brute out. One word, and he would never appear in sight again. But now, he had no security, no power, no name. He was just Alex, an unemployed guy in an old jacket. He felt his fists clench. He wanted to walk over, hit the guy, put him in his place. But what could he do? Start a fight he would likely lose? Attract attention that could destroy his carefully constructed cover story? His poverty turned out to be not just a disguise, but a limitation. It robbed him of the ability to act in his usual ways. He looked at her. She stood there, pale, but with a stubborn expression. She wasn't crying, wasn't shouting, just trying to defend her boundaries, using the only weapons she had, words and dignity. And her inner strength, revealed in such a vulnerable moment, struck Alex more than any jewels or titles he had seen on the women in his circle. The man became more aggressive. He reached for her. It was a critical moment. Alex could no longer just sit there. It didn't matter who he was now. It didn't matter what his cover story was. He was a man, and he saw a woman being harassed. His instinct proved stronger than the fear of exposure or physical weakness. He stood up abruptly. He didn't run over shouting, didn't try to play the action hero. He simply walked to the counter. His heart was pounding. What would he say? What would he do? "Excuse me," Alex said in a calm but firm voice, addressing the drunken man. "Leave the girl alone. Can't you see she's working?" The man turned. Surprise flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by aggression as he sized up his opponent, a thin guy in worn clothes. "What are you, her knight in shining armor? Get lost before you get hurt." Alex didn't back down. He knew his chances in a fight were slim, but he wasn't going to retreat. "I'm just asking you to behave yourself," he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady despite the trembling in his knees. This was a game where the stakes weren't money, but something far more subtle and important. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The girl watched Alex with wide eyes, clearly not expecting intervention. Her eyes showed concern for him. It's unknown how it would have ended, but at that moment, a sturdy older man, apparently the owner, walked into the cafe. Seeing the scene, he quickly assessed the situation and, in a loud, commanding voice, kicked the troublemaker out. The man, muttering curses, retreated. Silence fell in the cafe. The girl let out a sigh of relief. The owner walked over to her. "Thanks, Anna," he said, patting her shoulder. Then he shifted his gaze to Alex. His look was scrutinizing. Alex felt awkward. His attempt to intervene had been clumsy, almost comical from an outside perspective. The girl, Anna, finally looked at Alex. The fear that had been in her eyes moments ago was gone. There was surprise, and something else. She smiled slightly, a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you," she said softly. Alex nodded. He didn't know what to say. His bravery bordering on recklessness, triggered by instinct and shock, had been spontaneous. He had acted like a human being, not like a millionaire or someone pretending to be poor. He had acted as his heart dictated. And this act, small, perhaps practically useless, became his first real challenge in this new life. A challenge to his own limitations, his fear, his habit of solving everything with money. He had met someone who evoked something more in him than just interest. Someone for whom he was willing to risk his cover story, his comfort, even his safety. And this meeting, this test, became the beginning of a path that turned out to be far more complex and significant than he could have imagined. He was looking for sincere love. And he found something that required him to be sincere himself. And that was the hardest part. The incident at the cafe became a turning point, but not in the direction Alex had hoped. His heroic act didn't open the doors to Anna's world for him, but rather cast him in a strange light. He tried visiting the cafe more often, buying the cheapest tea, or just standing nearby, observing. He tried talking to Anna about the weather, the news, anything just to hear her voice, to see that genuine smile that had flickered after the drunkard left. But conversations didn't flow. He didn't know how to talk to her. His vocabulary, accustomed to stock market reports and legal terms, sounded artificial and clumsy. His jokes fell flat, his attempts to understand her world, insincere. He saw how she lived. The weariness in her eyes by the end of her shift, her cheap but clean clothes, the invisible worries hovering around her. She spoke of problems paying bills, sick relatives, hard work. For him, these were abstract concepts known only from news or charity reports. For her, harsh, daily reality. The chasm between them was vast, and Alex, stripped of his main tool, money, didn't know how to bridge it. He finally found some temporary work, hauling boxes in a warehouse. It was hell. His body, accustomed to gyms with a personal trainer, ached from the unfamiliar strain. Calluses on his hands hurt, his back screamed. He was slow, clumsy, constantly making mistakes. More experienced workers laughed at him. He felt not just like an unemployed pauper, but a complete failure. And this physical pain, this humiliation of his own incompetence in the simplest things, was a new, sharp sensation. But worse still was that his attempts to get closer to Anna began to arouse her suspicion. He asked too many questions that seemed odd to her. His hands, despite the warehouse work, remained too clean. His manners betrayed someone from a different circle. Once, he accidentally let slip a comment about some expensive wine he had tried, and immediately caught himself, but it was too late. Anna gave him a long, searching look. There was no anger in it, but there was wariness and sadness. "You know, Alex," she said one evening, clearing tables after closing, "you seem out of place, like you're looking at everything through glass, or like you're playing some kind of game." His heart clenched. He tried to laugh it off, but her gaze was too serious. "I don't know who you really are," she continued quietly, looking away. "And I get the feeling you don't know it yourself, or you're afraid to find out." Those words hit harder than any physical pain. She saw right through him. Not the millionaire, not the pauper, but a man lost somewhere between them. And this realization of his own phoniness, seen through the eyes of the one who was supposed to embody sincerity, was unbearable. The situation worsened. He lost the warehouse job. He simply couldn't cope. He had very little money left. The lease on his modest apartment was running out, and he didn't have the money to renew it. Food became scarce, dry rations, cheap pasta. For the first time in his life, he felt real, gnawing hunger. Not the light feeling before dinner at an expensive restaurant, but hunger that made his head spin and his stomach churn. Autumn rains gave way to the first piercing cold winds. His old jacket offered little warmth. At night, he shivered under a thin blanket. The comfort he had been accustomed to his whole life dissolved, leaving only cold and dampness. He felt defenseless, vulnerable to the elements and to the reality he had so carelessly decided to test. His experiment was collapsing. He had come here to find true love and found only confirmation of his alienation. Anna, the one person who had evoked a genuine response in him, now looked at him with suspicion. He had lost his footing. The wealthy world remained somewhere far off, inaccessible, and in the world he had created for himself, he had suffered a complete fiasco. One evening, as rain beat against the windows and the apartment was cold and dark, he was saving electricity. Alex sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. His stomach rumbled with hunger. His hands were dirty. His clothes smelled damp. He looked at his calloused palms. The hands that had managed billions now couldn't earn a piece of bread. It was painfully absurd. Despair washed over him. The loneliness, which had previously been a philosophical concept, became a suffocating physical sensation. He was alone in this cold, alien place, without a single soul he could turn to. His wealth, his name, all of it was powerless here. He himself was powerless. Thoughts swirled in his head. Go back. Stand up right now, dial his trusted associate's number, and in a couple of hours, he'd be in his penthouse, warm, fed, with familiar comforts. Forget all this like a bad dream. But then what? Then he would remain who he was, a lonely king in his gilded cage, forever surrounded by the ghosts of greed. He closed his eyes. Anna's face appeared before his inner eye. Her bright, tired eyes. Her sincere, rare smile. Her words, "You seem out of place." She was right. He was out of place. He was from nowhere. A man who had lost himself between two worlds. Pain. It wasn't just the physical pain of hunger and cold, nor just the emotional pain of loneliness and failure. It was the pain of realizing his own emptiness. He had built a vast empire, but couldn't even build a simple bridge to another person. He had pretended to be poor to find love, but ended up truly poor. Poor in spirit, incapable of sincerity, even when the situation demanded it. He felt broken. His inner world, which had seemed so solid, built on self-confidence and his capabilities, based on money, was cracking at the seams. He was on the edge. Life on the edge turned out not to be a romantic adventure, but a cruel trial that he was failing. He had lost everything that mattered in his experiment: the hope of finding sincerity, the chance to be close to Anna, faith in himself in this new role. He was left alone with his pain and despair, in a cold, empty apartment, feeling like the loneliest and poorest man in the world. This was his fall, the culmination of suffering he had inflicted upon himself, and which turned out to be far more terrifying than he could have imagined. The next morning, Alex woke up from the cold and a knock at the door. His sleep had been shallow, tormented, filled with nightmares of failure and loneliness. He didn't immediately realize where he was. Reality crashed down on him. The empty apartment, the hunger, the cold. He wasn't expecting anyone. Who could possibly come to see him? The knock came again, more insistent. Slowly, struggling to his feet, Alex went to the door. He carefully peered through the peephole. Anna was standing on the landing. His heart stopped, then beat twice as fast. Her. Here. Why? He opened the door. Anna looked concerned. She stood there with a small bag in her hands, dressed in her simple jacket, the collar of her cafe uniform visible underneath. "Alex," she began hesitantly, Why weren't you at work yesterday? And your phone isn't answering." Alex felt the color rush to his face. He didn't know what to say. The warehouse job. He had completely forgotten about it in his despair. And the phone, of course, wasn't answering. He had turned it off. Anna looked at him closely. At his paleness, his gaunt face, his worn clothes, the emptiness behind him in the apartment. Her eyes held an understanding that Alex had feared seeing. She saw not just unemployed Alex, but a man in trouble. I lost my job," he finally forced out, feeling more awkward than ever before in his life. Lying to someone who saw right through him was agonizing. Anna nodded. There was no judgment in her eyes, only compassion. That very genuine, unfeigned feeling he had so desperately sought. "I figured," she said softly. "You hadn't been to the cafe for a few days, and so..." She held up the bag. "I brought some food. I had extra." Alex stared at the bag. A simple cloth bag, probably containing a modest lunch or dinner. This bag was brought by a girl who, he knew, counted every penny herself. She was giving her last, sharing with him, a man who had pretended to be poor, though he could have bought the entire cafe with all its supplies. It was a blow, not pain, but a blow. The realization of how petty his suffering had been compared to real need, to real generosity. He, the owner of empires, sat on the cold floor feeling worthless, while this simple girl, who might be hungry herself, came to share with him. In that moment, the wall he had built, the wall of cynicism, suspicion, fear of people, finally crumbled. Her kindness, her pure heart, manifested in such a simple yet incredible way, pierced any armor. Alex felt something inside him break. It wasn't destruction like before, but rather liberation. Tears welled up in his eyes. Real tears, which he hadn't allowed himself for years. From shame, from relief, from shock. "Anna," he whispered, his voice breaking. I can't take this." "Yes, you can," she said firmly, handing him the bag. "We're human, aren't we? Today you need help, tomorrow maybe I will. It's normal." Her words were simple, but they held such depth, such wisdom, the likes of which he had never encountered in any of his wealthy and influential acquaintances. "We're human." Just 2 words, spoken without pathos, without a hint of his possible past or present. A simple affirmation of humanity. Alex took the bag. His hands trembled. He felt the weight of the bag like the weight of the world. It wasn't just food. It was a symbol of selfless kindness, a symbol of the human connection he had craved so much. He looked up at Anna. Her eyes still held concern, but a softness had appeared too. "Thank you," he said, and this time his voice was steadier, though full of emotion. "Thank you, Anna. You have no idea how much this means." She smiled slightly. "I can imagine. Someone helped me like this once." She didn't ask extra questions, didn't demand explanations, just was there. In that moment, Alex realized true value. Not in money, not in power, not in luxury, but in this simple act of kindness, in a person's ability to see another human being, regardless of circumstances, and extend a helping hand. In sincerity that asks nothing in return. This was that invisible and intangible thing that can only be felt with the heart. And he felt it. Finally, felt it. The turning point wasn't in regaining wealth or success, but in discovering humanity. In realizing that his greatest poverty wasn't the lack of money, but the lack of connection with other people, his own cynicism and distrust. Anna, with her simple kindness, had shown him the way. A path not to external wealth, but to internal wealth. He stood in the doorway of his cold, empty apartment, the bag of food in his hands, watching Anna walk down the stairs. The cold still pierced him. Hunger still gnawed at him. But deep inside, a flicker ignited. Faint, but real. A flicker of hope. He had been broken by his experiment, but healed by humanity. He came looking for love, and found something more. Faith in people, and a path back to himself. And that path began right now, with this bag in his hands and that quiet knock on the door, which became the loudest sound in his life. Anna left, leaving Alex alone with his thoughts and the bag of food. He went back into the apartment, closed the door, and leaned against it. He still held the bag. Slowly, he placed it on the floor, sat down beside it, opened it. Inside were simple provisions: bread, a little cheese, a couple of apples, a tea bag, a pack of the cheapest cookies. A treasure trove for a man who hadn't eaten in nearly a day. But he didn't rush to eat. He just looked at these simple items, brought by the hand of someone who barely made ends meet herself. There was meaning in this. The meaning of his journey. The meaning of his whole life. He had sought true love and found true humanity. And he realized that perhaps one simply cannot exist without the other. This event became not just a turning point, but the beginning of a new stage. Alex no longer felt like a worthless imposter. He felt a responsibility for the kindness shown to him. He couldn't let Anna down. He couldn't allow himself to give up. Not after she had shown him that even in the most difficult circumstances, people are capable of incredible generosity. He started to act, not like a millionaire solving problems with money, but like a person who had to survive. He found a new job, as a loader at a wholesale market. It was hard, but he gritted his teeth and worked. He earned pennies, but they were his. Honestly earned money. He learned to appreciate every dollar, every opportunity. He felt the taste of exhaustion, real, physical exhaustion, after a long day's work. And it was satisfying. It was real. He continued visiting the cozy corner. Now he could afford not just tea, but sometimes a simple lunch. He talked with Anna. Conversations became easier, more natural. He stopped playing a role, stopped asking strange questions. He just was. He listened to her stories about life, problems, small joys. He talked about his work, without mentioning the past, of course, about his thoughts. He didn't pretend to fully understand her life, but he sincerely tried to understand, and Anna sensed it. The barrier between them began to crumble, not thanks to money or status, but thanks to sincerity and mutual respect. She saw him tired after work, sometimes with bruises on his hands. She saw his attempts to cope with difficulties. She saw not a successful man, but a man who was struggling. And it was this that inspired trust and affection in her. She stopped seeing him as the strange Alex and began to see just Alex, reliable, quiet, but attentive. Of course, Alex couldn't stay in this situation forever. He had obligations to his corporation, to the people who trusted him. Time passed, and he needed to make a decision, but he was afraid that the truth would destroy everything he had managed to build with Anna, afraid to see in her eyes the same disappointment or even contempt he had seen in the eyes of other women who learned about his wealth. The denouement came unexpectedly. One evening, as Alex sat in the cafe after closing, helping Anna clear tables, he often stayed to help. It had become their little ritual. A black armored limousine pulled up to the cafe. Such cars don't park on streets like this. Two men in sharp suits got out. They looked around, clearly searching for someone. Anna and Alex watched them with surprise. The men headed straight for the cafe. Their gazes flickered over Alex in his worn clothes, not pausing. They approached Anna. "Excuse me," "We're looking for Alexander Sterling III," one of them asked, addressing Anna with a polite but official tone. Anna looked at Alex in bewilderment. Alexander Sterling III. That name was from another life, from the life he had so carefully hidden. He felt a chill run down his spine. The men continued. "We were informed he might be in this area. It's urgent." Anna turned to Alex. There was a question in her eyes, a huge, silent question. Alexander Sterling III? Was that him? This simple guy who hauled boxes at the market and helped her clear tables? Alex took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived. He couldn't pretend anymore, not in front of her. "I am Alexander Sterling III," he said calmly, addressing the men. His voice sounded confident, with that familiar note of authority he had suppressed for so long. The men turned to him, their faces registering surprise and relief. "Mr. Sterling, we've been looking everywhere for you. There's been—" But Alex wasn't listening to them. All his attention was fixed on Anna. She stood there, pale, staring at him as if seeing a ghost. Her eyes reflected a whole spectrum of emotions: shock, disbelief, perhaps hurt that she had been deceived. "Anna," Alex began. She shook her head, her eyes fixed on him. Her lips trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. Not tears of joy or surprise, tears of pain, the pain of deception. You're rich?" she whispered. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Alex didn't deny it, didn't try to justify himself. What was the point? The truth came out in the ugliest possible way, not in a romantic confession, but with the arrival of his past life, ruthlessly destroying his present one. "Yes," he answered quietly. I'm very wealthy." Anna took a step back as if from a fire. That same wariness he had seen before appeared in her eyes, but now multiplied 100-fold. "And all this—" She gestured around the cafe at his worn clothes. "Was it a game? You were pretending?" Alex felt everything inside him tighten at her words. A game. To her, that's exactly what it looked like. A cruel, cynical game of a rich idler playing with the life of an ordinary girl. "No, Anna," he tried to explain. "It wasn't a game. I was looking—" "Looking," she interrupted, bitterness in her voice. "Looking for entertainment, new experiences. Why? To laugh at how other people live." "No." Alex took a step towards her. I was looking for someone who would see me, not my money. I have everything, Anna, everything. But I'm lonely. I don't know who to trust. Everyone around me wants only one thing. And I thought that if I became nobody, maybe I could find someone who would love me. Just me." His words sounded sincere, desperate. But Anna listened, and her expression changed. Shock gave way to understanding, and pain. Pain that the person she had started to trust turned out to be someone else entirely. Pain that her kindness might have been directed at someone who didn't need it. "So, all this time you knew you had somewhere to go back to?" she asked quietly. "That you had money, a home, everything, and I shared my last bit of food with you?" Those words were the strongest reproach, the most painful accusation. They struck right at his heart, reminding him of his greatest deceit, of the moment he accepted her help, knowing he could have bought her the entire cafe. "Anna, He didn't know what to say. Excuses would sound pathetic. "You see, Alex," she said, her voice no longer holding anger, only weary sadness. "It's not about your money. It's that you weren't honest. Not with me. Not with yourself. You came into my world, pretended to be one of us, while all along you knew you were different. And I believed you. I saw a man who was struggling, who needed support, and I helped you because it's the right thing to do. Because we're human." Her last words echoed his own epiphany, but now they sounded like an accusation. She looked at him one last time. Her eyes no longer held any affection, any trust, none of the spark that had drawn him to this cafe. Only sadness and disappointment. "Goodbye, Alex," she said softly. And without waiting for a reply, she turned and quickly walked away down the narrow street, leaving him standing there, between his two worlds, surrounded by his security detail and shattered illusions. The truth was revealed, not as he had dreamed, in a romantic confession and joyful surprise, but in the bitter disappointment of the person whose sincerity he had sought and, having found it, destroyed with his own lack of sincerity. He came looking for love, and found a lesson, cruel but necessary. A lesson that the most valuable thing is not what you have, but who you are, and that any attempt to build something real on a foundation of lies is doomed to fail. Justice prevailed in that he received not love, but the truth about himself, seen through the eyes of the most sincere person he had ever met. And that was the hardest but most important reward. Alex stood on the sidewalk by the entrance to the cozy corner, devastated. Behind him stood the two men in sharp suits, the embodiment of the life he had tried to escape. Before him stretched the narrow, rain-slicked street down which Anna had just disappeared, the embodiment of the life he had so desperately tried to grasp. He remained between two worlds, fully belonging to neither. Returning to the penthouse felt strange. The familiar luxury seemed fake, alien. The panoramic city view no longer captivated him, but merely emphasized his isolation. He sat in his enormous, perfectly furnished office, but felt as if he were still sitting on the cold floor of that small apartment. The past caught up with him. During his absence, numerous matters requiring immediate attention had piled up. He immersed himself again in the world of numbers, deals, negotiations. His professionalism hadn't vanished. He remained a brilliant businessman. But something had changed, irrevocably. A depth appeared in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He became more attentive to the people around him, stopped seeing a potential deceiver in everyone. He learned to listen. He started noticing small things, the weariness in his secretary's eyes, a partner's nervous gesture, the quiet joy of a rank-and-file employee. His decisions became more human. He began to support charitable projects not for image, but because he had seen with his own eyes how people who needed help lived. But he remained alone. Anna never reappeared in his life. He didn't try to find her, understanding he had no right. He had betrayed her trust, and no amount of wealth could fix that. Sometimes he drove past that narrow street. The cozy corner was still there, with its lopsided tables and sign. He never went in, just looked from his car window at that place, which had witnessed his greatest failure and most important discovery. That hunger, that cold, that humiliation, it all remained in his memory. But it ceased to be a source of pain and shame. It became a lesson. A reminder that true wealth isn't in the number of bank accounts, but in the quality of connections. That the most valuable things in the world truly cannot be bought. True generosity isn't about giving money. That's easy when you have plenty. But about giving a part of yourself, your time, your attention, your compassion, even when you seemingly have nothing, like Anna. And he, having everything, had nearly died of spiritual poverty. He never found a wife who would love him not for his money. But he found something more important. He learned to value those capable of loving not for something, but just because. He stopped fearing loneliness because he understood that loneliness isn't the absence of people around, but the absence of connection with them. and connection can only be built on sincerity. Now, sitting in his luxurious penthouse, he often picked up the old, worn newspaper, the same one he sat with on the park bench, ran his fingers over the rough paper, and remembered Anna's eyes, bright, tired, full of sincere kindness. He hadn't found the love he sought there, but he found something that made him feel human, real, for the first time in his life. The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart. This quote, which began his story, was now not just words, but the essence of his life. He lost an illusion, but gained sight. Saw the world not through the lens of his millions, but through the lens of humanity. And that was the most valuable acquisition on his long, risky journey. He never found that specific woman, but he found himself. And perhaps, only by finding himself, could he someday find her. Someone who would see not the wealth, not the pretense, but his true heart.